Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan. And I am here with Dr. Peace. I love that name. I aspire to be a Dr. Peace someday.
You didn't choose your parents wisely.
Sort of reminds me of my brother before he was adopted. His name was Joe Love. And then he became Joe Arthur. It was a downgrade in names. So,
Great.
I am so thrilled to have you with us tonight. I'm not sure that I have experienced kind of such a kindred spirit when it comes to thinking about evangelism, thinking about how Christians, their kind of posture in the world with non-Christians. There's sort of a kindred spirit I feel with you, having read your book, Holy Conversation. We're in the middle of a series right now. We just started it last week, this past Sunday, called Holy Conversations, based on your book. We're going to spend 4 weeks taking a look at the themes in the book and how we have better conversations as Christians with those who are around us. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, it's great to be here. As I mentioned to you, this is the first time I have done a live stream kind of thing like this. Zoom is okay, but this is a new experience. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, until about 2 years ago, this is the first time I've ever. We've all had to adapt.
Yeah,
and our conversations are a little bit different, a little more technologically based. You know, one of the things that we had a chat a while ago, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, when we were setting this up, and I found out that you are a UCC pastor,
yes,
which is the United Church of Christ.
Yes.
And I don't know the people who are watching or listening, how much they know of kind of the different personalities of denominations or tribes or whatever branches of the Christian faith. But the UCC church is not particularly known for their evangelism or enthusiastic or passionate about evangelism.
Yeah.
But you are, and you're a UCC pastor. How does a UCC pastor end up getting interested in evangelism?
Well, actually, it was the other way around. I was called to a ministry of evangelism when I was in college. I then went to seminary, learned something about how to do that, worked for 8 years in Africa with a parachurch organization, doing citywide missions in a number of African cities. We returned from, we're based in South Africa. It was a time of apartheid. My wife in particular got in trouble with various officials because she had this odd idea that she could just go visit her Zulu friends anytime she wanted to and other things like that. And so after 8 years, we came home before we got deported then. I started teaching at that point. I joined the faculty of Gordon Conwell and was involved in preparing men and women for ministry, including evangelism. And I realized, well, I ought to get ordained because this is what I'm doing. I purposely had not got ordained before that because I didn't want people to think I was being paid to talk about Jesus. But my situation changed, and I got ordained. I was a member of a UCC church, Hamilton Congregational Church. And you're right about the UCC in the sense we have not been known for evangelism, social action, justice ministries. That really is our strong suit. However, I think people forget that we did have a campaign a few years ago called God is Still Speaking. And in fact, I wrote a book as part of that. If God is still speaking, which I affirm, the question is, how do you hear this still speaking God? And so I wrote my book, Noticing God, which identifies 7 Environments.
I have a copy of that book right here. You
Yeah,
sent it to me.
yeah.
Thank you. It's been sitting right next to my brother Lawrence, practicing the presence of God.
Well, I feel honored to be
They're,
in the
well,
same
they're in
company
the
as.
same spirit of that.
Yes, yeah. And so the UCC, in the background, has been engaged in evangelism in its own way, and this generous welcome that characterizes the church. Anybody is invited to the church.
Yeah.
Is at the center of that, and so this has been part of my ministry. I am an anomaly in the UCC. The
Okay.
UCC, we sometimes joke UCC stands for Unitarians Considering Christ, which
That
there
sounds like
is
an
some.
insider joke.
Yeah, it's an insider joke. Yeah, there,
I,
but
I think, one of the things that I try to lead at Sycamore Creek, and I feel like we do a pretty decent job, is of putting justice and evangelism together. And I don't understand why those things don't show up together in churches more often,
absolutely, yeah,
especially in the Wesleyan tradition, which is what we're from, being United Methodist. Wesley had personal holiness, which is kind of the evangelism side, and social holiness, which is kind of the
okay,
justice side. So those two things together, I mean, they ought to go hand in hand in pretty much any church that calls itself Christian.
absolutely, yeah, yeah.
If you're just tuning in, I'm Pastor Tom Arthur, and I am here with Dr. Richard Peace, who is author of Holy Conversations and several other books. He's also the professor of evangelism and spiritual formation at Fuller Seminary, and you'll see some contact information for him there. We would love to get to your questions. So if you have a question, drop it in the chat. We've got, Dr. Peace, we've got several people who are watching us. Grateful that you're with us tonight, Kathy, and Gretchen. Really excited that she's here to hear what you have to say. And of course, the pastor's wife is joining in from the other room. So thank you, Sarah, for joining us. Dr. Peace, you highlight in your book that Christians aren't known for being great conversation partners, especially about God. That is so sad.
Yeah.
It rings so true to me.
Yeah.
Why is that, and how did we get that reputation?
Well, I think it has to do with the ministry of evangelism that developed such a bad reputation in the 20th century. Sharing one's faith was called witnessing, and witnessing devolved often into a stranger approaching you at a mall and asking if you are saved. And if you say no, you set yourself up for a 3-part conversation that consists of first his or her conversion story, edited down to under 3 minutes. This was followed with a stereotypical so-called plan of salvation. There, 4 spiritual laws, something like that, and then often a very pressured question of whether you were ready to make a commitment to Jesus, which, when you think about it, is really outrageous. I mean, to make that kind of commitment in that space of time
On the fly.
Exactly, a commitment is going to change the rest of your life if it's deep and honest. There, and so evangelism became coercive, bad-mannered, almost arrogant, and who wants to do that? You're going to lose your friends, and besides that, never felt right. I was professor of evangelism, but I could never engage in that. In my youth, I had done something like that, but I thought there's got to be healthier ways for us to talk about the good news.
That whole thing reminds me, my wife and I used to live in Petoskey, and when we were back up there after having been in seminary at Duke Divinity School for a while, I was covering the sabbatical of my pastor for a summer, and we were offering for anybody to come in for morning prayer. It was like at 7 or 8 a.m. to come and join us in our living room for morning prayer. And we had a little sign on the door that said, if you're here for morning prayer, come on in. And someone from another, faith that is well known for going door to door, came up to the door. Sarah saw him. My wife saw this person through the window, and they looked at the little sign, and they got a consternated look on their face. They turned around, started to walk back down the steps, stopped, turned back around, came back up, knocked on the door. Sarah went and opened it, and he said, do you know why God sent the flood to destroy all the whatever it was on the earth? My wife said, I'm a student at Duke Divinity School. Are you sure you want to get into this with me?
Oh, that's great.
And he said, no. And he turned around and walked away.
Yeah.
Which that's our image of how this this goes down.
Yeah. And who wants to do that? So part of what I tried to do was to move it from a confrontation to a conversation. And that's the movement you find in the book Holy Conversation.
Say that again. From
confrontation, are you saved? To conversation, hey, I want to get to know you. And here's what's on my mind. What are you thinking about? And so on.
That should be a slogan. I mean, we just need that slogan on T-shirts for the whole environment that we live in the United States right now. From confrontation to conversation, whether it's about faith or whether it's about COVID or politics. Just your neighborhood association meeting.
So,
what does it take what does it take for a Christian, or really anybody, to be a good conversation partner?
Well, I think basically just learning the art of conversation. The art of conversation is more about listening than it is talking. It's about give and take, about issues that are of interest and need of one another. As you spend time with one another, you begin to trust one another. It's conversation that needs to be characterized by honesty, by vulnerability. That was never a strong suit of the witnessing paradigm there. And so this is what I was trying to do in the book, Holy Conversation, is to think about what's involved in talking about Jesus in the context of felt need and longing, sin. What is this odd thing called repentance and confession, all kinds of stereotypes around those kinds of words. Talking about faith as not just belief, but knowledge and trust and commitment, saying yes to the way of Jesus. All this in the context of friendship and care and love, which emerges in a community.
We talk at Sycamore Creek about our three core values are being curious, creative, and compassionate.
I love that.
And I think that curious word could really do a lot of heavy lifting for us at Sycamore Creek, at least in terms of this sort of genuine interest, genuinely be curious about somebody.
Not as a scheme.
Be interested and ask questions that go beyond the surface.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Gretchen says that if we made a T-shirt from confrontation to conversation, that she would wear that T-shirt.
That's great.
Thanks, Gretchen. If you're just tuning in, I'm Tom Arthur. I'm the pastor at Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan. And I am here with Dr. Richard Peace, who is the professor of evangelism and spiritual formation at Fuller Seminary. You'll see some contact information there. We would love to we're going to get to your questions in a little bit. What questions do you have for Dr. Peace tonight? And when we get a little bit further into the conversation, people are already putting some in, but just want to say a couple of shout outs here. Chrissy, thanks so much for joining us tonight. And David really appreciates the Unitarians considering Christ. So it's good church humor there to kick us off. We've been talking about this word evangelism, which that feels like it is a legitimate word in the Christian tradition more broadly. What exactly is evangelism, and what's the whole scary part of that?
Yeah. It has become scary. Let me say just a word though about my position at Fuller. It is senior professor of evangelism and spiritual formation, which means retired. Retired 3 years ago from Fuller, and from that position, which I had served in for 24 years at Fuller, and 40 plus years all told. But now I'm retired. Why is the word evangelism so scary? And I think the short answer to that is because we got the wrong take on evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
It's not some sort of scheme or trick or plan. It's not about coercion. In the New Testament, what evangelism is all about is community, being a community together. For the first 3 centuries of the Christian church, the church was basically a connected series of small groups in various places at various times. Christians didn't have access to large buildings apart from anything else. We know from archaeology that the homes were small, maybe could fit a dozen people in them, something like that. That was the size of the church, and it's into that community, small group, that others were invited. Jesus and the 12 being the model for small groups. And by the way, the research has been done about small groups, and that part of my life has been spent in small groups. 13 is the optimum number for a task-oriented small group. And I bet Jesus didn't get that number from college or seminary, anywhere.
He didn't have a sociologist he could lean on for that.
No. How did he do all he did? Yeah. Anyway, communities, and these communities were characterized by deep hospitality there. They were communities that had become safe for non-members. That's the thing that we need to develop our communities. We make them havens of safety at this point in time. Communities of care, communities of love, communities of conversation, communities of lived faith. I think our faith is transmitted as much by how we live and who we are than what we say there. The words are important, but it needs to be part of community. Evangelism is all about invitation into these communities, invitations into following the way of Jesus. And so when we recover that original sense of evangelism, it doesn't become scary, and it becomes a possibility for us in churches.
I think I've tried to define evangelism in my own ministry as an invitation to follow Jesus in community with the church.
Yes.
And I think that I grew up in kind of evangelical circles, and the concept of evangelism was much more individual than that.
Yes.
It was accepting the 4 spiritual laws. It was being able to answer, if you died tonight, where you would go, heaven or hell. And it was all sort of cognitive, whether you had the right answers. And
it's scary.
Not nearly as communal as, hey, here's a group of people who are trying to follow the way of Jesus. We'd love for you to join us. And
that melds with my understanding. For the last decade or so, actually 2 decades now, what I've been engaged in and teaching about and writing about is something that I've come to call contemplative evangelism. I'm
Mm-hmm.
professor of evangelism and spiritual formation. And when I first assumed that title at Fuller, it raised a lot of eyebrows. People would say, we know what evangelism is. We don't like it. We know what spiritual formation is, and we do like that part. How do the two connect together? And my answer would be that that's been the problem, that we've not allowed them to connect together because they fit together. And in this particular postmodern era, where people are interested in spirituality but not interested in the church, that what we need to do is to create. Well, here's my definition of contemplative evangelism. It's all about creating safe spaces and creative places where the spiritually curious can explore their own spiritual pilgrimages. We're all on a spiritual pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
In the context of a hospitable, loving, interpretive community of living faith. There's a lot jammed together in that.
We need to hear that again. Can we rewind on that whole sentence? Say that again.
Yeah. All right. Let me actually read it to you. So get it right. Contemplative evangelism is all about creating safe spaces and creative places where the spiritually curious can explore their own spiritual pilgrimages in the context of a hospitable, loving, interpretive community of living faith. And let me just give you one.
You got curious in there. You got creative. You're just missing the word compassionate. How about a compassionate community?
Okay, that loving community. That's close enough.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's good.
Hey, see, you've got that in your DNA.
I know. Yeah, that's part of, when we say we're compassionate, we're going to try to show you God's compassion wherever we encounter you. Yeah. We're human, so we don't always get that right, but that's our goal. Your book, your contemplative evangelism, that's a really intriguing word, and it reminds me of another author that I know, and a woman who was the dean at Duke Divinity School for a little while, Elaine Heath, and her book, The Mystic Way of Evangelism, which I found really compelling, and it was really about that people, the like movements of people coming to follow Jesus always go with a resurgence of holiness in the community and justice, and that becomes attractive to the world around it. So it's always starting with the community being true to who it is,
exactly,
and who it's supposed to be, that then becomes compelling.
Yeah,
I just mentioned Elaine Heath's book. Do you have a favorite evangelism book besides your own, or maybe I stole your thunder with Elaine's book?
Well, it was on the list. What I was going to say was a favorite book about evangelism. That's like asking me if I have a favorite child. And I have 6 books that I want to mention, and one of which is Elaine's. I actually had the chance to read that in manuscript form before it was published.
You're in the circle of trust there with Elaine.
Yeah. I don't know if I've met her. I know her through I don't know her well, but I've met her through the Academy for Evangelism and Theological Education. But I was just very struck by that book, and that's one of the newer books that was on top of the list. Priscilla Pope Levinson, who was also at Duke for a while. Her husband was New Testament professor at Duke. She wrote in 2020 a book called Models of Evangelism, which I had a small part in. But it is excellent, an excellent book. And Beth Severson has a new book called Not Done Yet, Reaching and Keeping Unchurched Emerging Adults. These are all new books that are out there. And you notice that it's 3 by women, which is rare and unusual. Beth is, in fact, the new chairman of the Academy for Evangelism and Spiritual in Christian Education, and first woman to be in that role, which says something about the fact that whole thinking about evangelism is becoming a lot healthier. A couple
Yeah.
of the older books that I was going to recommend was Michael Green's Evangelism in the Early Church, written in 1970. It was updated in 1990, early 1990s, but still has a lot of good information about how did the early church do it.
Mm-hmm.
William Abrahams, who's Methodist, he's at Perkins, or was it? He died just recently, unfortunately. Logic of Evangelism was an excellent book. Is an excellent book.
This really was like asking you who your favorite kid is.
Yeah, yeah. I have a long list. We could just spend the rest of the time.
We just keep talking books.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the book nerds among us would love that. Everybody else might eventually start to tune out. But if you're just tuning in, if you're just tuning in, I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan. And I am here with Dr. Richard Peace, the senior professor. Did I get that right? Senior professor of evangelism and spiritual formation at Fuller, which is to say he's retired. But you can find information there on his Fuller faculty page about him, and you can email him there at his Fuller email. He still keeps track of those things. We're going to get to your questions in just a little bit, but if you have questions, drop them in the chat. At Sycamore Creek, we would love to connect with you a little bit more fully. If you're not familiar with Sycamore Creek, you can connect with us through sycamorecreek.church.org/connect. And that's a way that we'll be in touch with you and see how we can connect with you. I see David Lalone. I should have known. David could talk books all night long. And my wife is a big bookie as well, so she probably would be happy for us to keep listing names. But I want to get to maybe a question that I know I wrestle with. And actually, I'm going to throw a book out there that kind of preludes this a little bit. I had to take an evangelism course as a United Methodist pastor. It's a requirement for ordination. Yeah. And I don't know, like, if this was this counted as my evangelism course, but I took a class on Leslie Newbigin. Leslie Newbigin was a missionary to, I believe, India. For many years, and then when he was British. He came back to the UK and found that it wasn't Christian anymore, and felt like that he had to be a missionary again to the West. And a lot of that was in more kind of thinking about how the West thinks. And his book, Proper Confidence, was my favorite book that I read at seminary. And he walks through kind of the philosophical history of the West to postmodernism, and gives a kind of foundation for thinking about Christianity and belief inside of a postmodern worldview and structure. And inside of postmodernism, you know, it's a very pluralistic world. And it's, you know, you do what you do, I do what I do. We'll coexist together. We'll tolerate each other. Any kind of suggestion that I might convert is proselytizing. Is evangelism still relevant? Why aren't we just dropping that as a practice in that perspective?
Well, we're not dropping it as a practice because Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations, because Paul said, preach the gospel in season and out, and because the relatively new discipline of interfaith studies is all about people from different faith traditions in conversation, about their deeply held religious commitments. The older discipline, interreligious study, was really an academic discipline where you compared and contrasted different religious systems, looking for similarities, differences, things like that. It stayed in the head, it never moved to the heart. But interfaith studies demands that participants have not just knowledge about religion, but an active commitment, involvement in a faith community. And in the postmodern world, as Christians, what we bring to the table is our story, just as others, faith traditions, are also invited to do exactly the same thing. And so we need to know that story. We need to live that story. We need to know how to share that story, all of which is evangelism at heart. And if I can just be personal for a moment, my daughter, Jennifer Howe Peace, was a professor of interfaith studies at Andover Newton Theological Seminary for a decade. She in fact, helped define the whole field of interfaith studies. And the book that she was a key editor of is entitled My Neighbor's Faith. Let's see, I've got it here. It's a, all right, there it is. Orbis book. She shows how the conversation works by collecting stories from some 50 different people from various faith traditions, telling stories about their own interfaith encounters. Mm. That's what we bring to the table. We have to have a story, not just in our head, but in our heart. We need to be practitioners. We need to be participants. We can't just be distant academics at this point in time. So, yes, in this postmodern world, maybe the word evangelism is not the right one. It's too laden with negative connotations at that point. That's maybe not what we want to use in that context, but our story of Jesus. That's still very much a part of the whole conversation.
I love that. I love that idea. And you're right. Evangelism. I grew up in kind of an evangelical setting and have both appreciated that context and seen its deep limitations and flaws at the same time. And have in the past still referred to myself as an evangelical, but that word has become so politicized lately that I can hardly even use it. Yeah. And maybe the same thing is true of evangelism, that it's just as a word has struggled. But I love how you're thinking about what's our story.
Yeah.
And that still is very relevant.
Yeah. My wife refused to tell her non-church friends that I was professor of evangelism, because she didn't have to wade through that long conversation to explain that.
So what did she say? You're the professor of faith stories, or
practical theology. How's that?
Okay.
Which is true. This is an aspect of practical theology. I mean, that's almost an oxymoron, practical theology, but that's another whole conversation.
My heavy-duty theologian friends at seminary hated that phrase because they'd say, what I'm doing is practical.
Yes, exactly.
Speaking of kind of academic world, you are a scholar of the Gospel of Mark, and particularly as it relates to evangelism.
Yeah.
Tell us about Mark and practical theology.
Well, I was waiting for you to ask this question because it gives me a chance to talk about conversion, which is a central topic in the field of evangelism. I wrote my PhD dissertation focusing on the question of the structure of the Gospel of Mark. We knew for a long time it was composed of all these little stories, pericopes, linked together, not chronologically in Mark's case. The first gospel, very first gospel, full story of Jesus, but thematically. And what I was trying to figure out is what's the organizing theme for Mark. And I came to realize after many years that Mark signals the structure of his gospel in the very first verse of the prologue, the beginning of the good news, the gospel of Jesus the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. And so his gospel, the first half of his gospel, is about the discovery, I argue, on the part of the 12, that Jesus was in fact the Messiah. And this is a three-part process. And the second half of the gospel is about what kind of Messiah he was, namely the Son of God. And when you begin to look at this whole process of the conversion of the 12, that's what the book is all about. Through this lens, it makes perfect sense. The structures fit together. The first part is about how the 12 discovered that he was a great teacher, a great rabbi. Then the second part is about the fact that Jesus was also a powerful prophet. And then the third part is about how the 12 discovered that he is, in fact, the Messiah. It's a Caesarea Philippi incident at that point in time. But as you know, when Peter says, when asked, what's the word on the street? Who do people say that I am? Yeah, no big deal, Jesus. You're the Messiah. And, he breathed a sigh of relief and he said, oh, that's great. Let me tell you about Messiahs. At this point, I'm going to be rejected by my people. I'm going to suffer. I'm going to die. No big deal. I'm going to be resurrected in 3 days. And Peter is aghast, takes him aside, doesn't want to embarrass him in front of the other disciples, and sort out his understanding of the Messiah. The Messiahs don't die. Second half of the gospel is how they discover what kind of Messiah he is. The fourth part is about their discovery that the Messiah is the Son of Man, who has come to redeem them. Here's where the cross comes in at that point. Fifth section is about the fact that he's also the long-expected son of David. And then the final section is the discovery that he is, in fact, the Son of God. And Mark signals at the end of the prologue, in the final verse of that prologue, Mark 1:15, that he describes the good news the way Jesus taught the good news there. The time is fulfilled. The kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe in the good news. And in the New Testament, the formula of repentance plus faith equals conversion. That's a constant throughout the New Testament. A lot of terms change depending upon the genre of writing in the New Testament, but this whole understanding of conversion remains the same. So, practical side of this, I contrast the punctiliar conversion of St. Paul on the Damascus Road. That's what everyone thinks of.
Punctiliar.
Point in time.
Point in time.
Sudden is probably a better word there. Okay. The sudden conversion to the gradual conversion of the 12, which took 3 years. So when we're talking about evangelism in terms only of Paul's point in time conversion, it lends itself to the attempt to replicate that experience in every other person. But only 30% of conversions are sudden. And even those, there is great variety. The 70% of genuine conversion is a process over time. Wow. And once we get this idea in mind, it means that part of what evangelism is walking with people on their particular spiritual pilgrimage that is pointing in the direction of their own conversion to Jesus. And the paradigm of gradual conversion in the New Testament implies whole new ways of doing evangelism. Yeah. So
This
that's
is this is sort of mind blowing on several levels. I love the contrast that you're drawing of the disciples in Mark having well, first of all, the disciples having to be converted.
yeah.
I don't think we even think about that, and that
I
it's
often ask the students, when were the disciples converted? What?
yeah. I mean,
Well,
they were born apostles, weren't they?
yeah, yeah,
Uh, but no, and you're talking about that as a process versus
yeah,
Paul, who it's this crazy Damascus like turnaround.
yeah,
Um, and the irony of your kind of study of Mark, at least for me, is Mark's use of constantly of the word immediately,
yes,
immediately this,
yeah,
immediately that, immediately
yeah,
this, and yet
yes.
you're describing absolutely. I mean, they're bumbling fools in Mark. Um,
They
they
are.
don't have any
They
clue
are.
what's
Yeah.
going on, and they're
No.
constantly getting it all wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. But they're making progress.
Mm-hmm.
Once they learn that he's this better than average rabbi, then they start treating him differently. And then they discover that he is this powerful prophet and so on. So it emerges over time. I mean, they don't walk in lockstep there. This is a literary feature that Mark has to use in this compressed amount of space he had. Manuscripts were only so long. You had only so many words that you could fit on them. So,
If you're just tuning in, I'm Tom Arthur, the pastor at Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan, and I am here with Dr. Richard Peace, the senior professor of evangelism and spiritual formation at Fuller Seminary, senior meaning retired. And we would love to connect with you at Sycamore Creek Church to invite you to journey with us in this process of being converted and following Jesus together. You can connect with us at sycamorecreekchurch.org/connect. We'd also love to get to your questions, and you can drop those in the comments, and we are going to get to them in just a little bit. But I want to at least ask one more question. We've had a couple of questions that have popped up in the chat here, Richard, but I want to ask one more question at least before we get to those, because I think this kind of sets up some of those questions. You encourage people in your book to find a conversation partner outside the church to talk to about the things that you discuss in your book, and that we've been highlighting in the series. We are in a 4-week series right now called Holy Conversations that is based on your book, Holy Conversation, which is helping us hopefully become better conversation partners with people outside the church. And how would you go about finding a conversation partner? I mean, that seemed, did you go up to the door like this guy who came up to our door, knock on it and say, do you know why God sent the flood? Like, is that how you do this?
Oh, you say, do you want to be my conversation partner? What are you selling? No. The best way to find a conversation partner is to invite them into your learning process as you explore Holy Conversation. And this series gives people that opportunity. Explain that you need a conversation partner who's not part of a church, so you can try out some of the ideas that you're learning about talking about your faith in ways that make sense to other people. Would you mind if, after each week's service, and I think about the things that we're talking about here, if I try them out on you and you can correct me, you help me get this right. I find 90% positive response. You want me to help you? See, evangelism is the other way around. I'm here to help you because you're a sinner lost. But now I want you to help me in my whole process. And that's not a ploy either, because conversion and conversation happen on both ends of the conversation, of the relationship. It's not one person being converted, it's both changing and growing. in New Testament conversion, I talk about big C conversion, little c conversion. Big C conversion, that first saying yes to following the way of Jesus, leads then to a lifetime of little c conversions. The way you come to Jesus is through repentance and faith. The way you follow Jesus is through repentance and faith. And so
Yeah.
It's not an either or, and you really do need the other. And you'd be amazed how many people say yes to that invitation, how much fun that conversation will be. No tension, no stress. You'll be amazed at what you learn too. Can I tell you a story about one of my favorite holy conversations?
I would love, yeah. Tell us that, and then if we've got people, there's the questions that have showed up are definitely about this topic of how to have these conversations. So,
great.
Tell us about one of your favorites.
Well, one of my best conversations was with the man from whom we bought our house here in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where we spend half the year now. Turns out we had very similar backgrounds. We were about the same age. We went to college at about the same time. He went to MIT. I went to Yale. We both studied electrical engineering during that period of time. He had gone to an excellent Roman Catholic prep school for boys and promptly left the faith after he graduated, having grown up in that system. I went to a 5,000 student public high school in Detroit and found faith there. We became friends, really good friends. He heard I had written a book called Noticing God. He said, I want to read that. I gave him a copy. And he read each chapter very carefully and then composed a long response to it, raising the questions, asking questions, talking about his own insights, to which then I responded in that chapter by chapter, a conversation that took about a year to go. It still is going on one level or another. And I learned a lot from him, and I think he's not quite so mad at the church. Well, no, he is very mad at the church. I don't think he's quite so mad at Jesus any longer. See, their holy conversation. You have questions?
Yeah, so Gretchen has been waiting a long time to hear the answer to this question. She dropped it back in the chat at the very beginning. I'm wondering how to handle conversations with non-Christians who are more interested in debating than having a beneficial, meaningful conversation.
Yeah, that's a good question. When it's an opportunity for argument, there's either an underlying agenda there that they've been so harmed by the church or by other Christian people, or they're contrarians. They love nothing better than a good argument. The answer to that is do what they want to do. Don't necessarily argue with them. Don't get mad at them. Don't get angry. Answer the best you can, including saying, "Wow, that's a good question. I have no idea." The answer that I'm going to ask Pastor Tom this weekend, and he's going to help me answer that question for you there. Keep the conversation low-keyed, loving. Don't get hooked, and just let that conversation unfold over time in other settings and circumstances. Keep it going. And take very seriously that a lot of people have really been harmed by the church. Don't spend a lot of time defending the church. It's on one level a human organization. Tell me what the perfect church is and I'll join it. And then because I'm not perfect, I'll ruin it. That sort of thing. How to be human beings here. That's a great question.
This question reminds me, Richard, I used to we called it agnostic pub group. I had a friend who was an atheist, and the two of us would lead this together. Neither of us were agnostics, but since he was atheist and I was Christian, we decided to call it agnostic pub group.
Met in the middle.
We'd read a book at a pub, and then we talk about it, and then we'd go to another pub and read another book. And we advertised this on meetup.com. So you would have people, just randomly show up who we never met before. And this one night, there was another atheist that showed up, and he was there to fight with me.
Yeah.
Intellectual sparring. And I actually love like intellectual sparring, but man, he was just hammering me to the point that my atheist friend who's co-leading this with me started defending me. And
that's great.
I figured, like, I'm taking blows here for the sake of my other friend. But then in not getting all riled up and just staying calm, this guy eventually, we ended up being friends on Facebook, and he eventually came back to me and apologized and said, hey, he had come to disagree with some of the things he thought. He was, like you said, kind of hurt by some church experiences. And I'm a pastor, and I'm like, at that point, a projection screen. This was not about me.
Yeah.
And he ended up kind of falling in more like, he ended up kind of falling into the Unitarian Church, which is a step, I guess, towards faith from atheism. Yeah. But I'll claim like getting beat up that night and not fighting. I mean, it wasn't that I wasn't making suggestions back, but just trying to be loving in the midst of it. And saying, that's a good question. I don't know. Like, I have that question too.
Yeah.
He didn't like that. He just kept pounding on me even with that.
That's great. Well, each person's pilgrimage is individual. I remember we had a student in Cape Town in South Africa. We were doing this week-long conversation at University of Cape Town with students, and we had put together a multimedia show about in the days when that was new and wonderful technology, and we used contemporary rock music and all that kind of stuff, and we talked about the problem that in culture and with people, and then how Jesus responds to that. The music was much better on the problem side of things. Rolling Stones, Sly and the Family Slick, and all that.
That's like Mordor is always more compelling on screen.
Yes. Yeah. But after one of these events, a student came to me and he said, "Oh, that was just wonderful." He said, I'm president of the Atheist Society here," which surprised me. I didn't know it existed. And he said, I didn't know what to expect, but you've changed my mind. I can no longer call myself an atheist. And I thought, oh, man, he's going to tell me he's becoming a Christian. He said, now I'm an agnostic. And I thought, that's great. He's moving in a Godward direction. I don't know where that's going to end up.
Yeah. This guy who was calling himself an atheist at the time decided later when he emailed me that he was a deist.
Deist, yes.
The God exists, but just is not involved.
Not involved, and not personal often. Yeah.
Got a question here from Sarah. What's the hardest conversation you've ever had about faith? And I don't know if this, when you told about your friend, the person you had this great conversation with who grew up in the Catholic system, I don't know whether abuse was involved there or not. And of course, Catholics are not the only one who struggled with that, but those sorts of conversations come to my mind with answering this question.
I think probably the conversations about faith in the context of my family. Those are often hard. One daughter's the theology professor. Another doctor is an MD and thinks God is a good idea, but not much beyond that. And the problem is that all the personal dynamics get immersed in that. Your kids are young?
Yeah, 8 and 11.
Yeah, you have that in mind ahead of you. And Sarah, hold on just a minute. This just came in the mail today.
Product placement.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
this
my
had
wife's
nothing
book.
to do. Yeah, had nothing to do with this. When you mentioned that she had written, my wife's an author too. Yeah, she'd written a couple books, and yeah, and including a new one called "Glimpsing the Eternal," which is about her walking with the pilgrimage of people going through the dying process. But hey, when I heard that, I looked it up and said, "Oh man, this is my kind of book." And so I got it, and it was so good that I gave it last weekend as a birthday present to another friend. So I had to buy my own copy, which is what this is. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to get the other two
We'll
as
pay
well.
you later for the advertising fees here.
Yeah, yes, yeah,
You know, that thought, you're absolutely right. I mean, the conversation that I have, getting beat up in a pub, I mean, intellectually beat up by an atheist who eventually decides he's not an atheist but a deist.
yeah,
That's nothing compared to the conversations that you have with family members
yeah,
that
yeah,
replicate the whole dynamic. And
yeah.
of course, they know you at your worst.
Yes,
Um,
yeah,
and
yeah,
um, that is really challenging. I
yeah.
wonder if you have any particular tips for being good conversation partners with our family members.
Which I have learned from the mistakes I've made. That sort of thing. Don't get hooked. Um, uh, uh, Stay kind. Stay loving. Take the blows. Yeah, you don't have to defend yourself vigorously. Be open and honest, and just talk about that. And talk to your mother. Judy, I met in seminary. Your wife's seminary grad too, and she never really had to read a book about holy conversation. She's just really good at that.
Mm,
I wrote this book because I'm really bad at
mm,
holy conversation. I'm an introvert, and I could be an extrovert as a professor at times, but basically I'm an introvert, and strangers scare me, not so much as they used to. And so I had to study this whole subject of conversation. I had to practice it and learn it and so on. But Judy, that's just in her bloodstream there, and she's been great with the kids in talking about faith in ways that they can understand over time, a lot better than I am.
mm. I think about the most positive conversations that I've had with family members, whether it's been about faith or whether it's been about politics or any hard topic. The best strategy I've had is to try to take the posture of a journalist, where
Ah,
you are just asking questions,
no, I like
trying
it.
to dig deeper. I don't think you're
Yeah,
going to do any convincing of your family members because they know you at your worst.
yeah,
So just,
and
I
your best.
don't mean like a Socratic, like where
Yeah,
you're trying to box them into a corner.
yeah,
Just again, being genuine, like assume you don't know anything about your family member.
yeah,
I think we assume we know a lot about, I think like in 2018, my dad and my stepmom both died, and I was going through my stepmom's stuff, papers, and found that my dad was her third marriage, and I knew that she had one other marriage. I didn't know she had another one. That this was her third. And then as I was going through her papers and stuff, there was all kinds of other stuff. Like she had college paper, like that she'd written in college and what college she went to. And I realized I never asked her what college she went to. And you realize really quickly these people you've lived with, or I did when she died, and I'm going through her personal
yeah,
stuff. I had no clue who my stepmom was.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that led me then to go to a bunch of other family members and set up meetings with them and say, tell me your life story. Because we have
yeah,
several data points where
yeah,
we connect, but I want to know, like, I know the history of our family. I know my parents divorced in this year, and I know you were born, and I know when we graduated, but tell me your inner world. Like, how are you making sense of all of that? And I've come to find out I barely know my family members because you don't really get underneath the surface with them like that. My sister, I had a conversation like this with. I think she would have told her life story in about 10 minutes, but I dragged it on to about 3 hours of a really good meal that I took her out on a brother-sister date. And I just kept being curious. And it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful.
Curious. Yeah. That's a holy conversation.
Yeah, yes. It really was.
Yeah.
So, friends, if you are just joining in, I'm Pastor Tom Arthur at Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan, and we have been talking with Dr. Richard Peace. He is the author of Holy Conversations, or Holy Conversation. We turned it plural in the title of our series, but your book is singular, Holy Conversation. Or I don't know, maybe is conversation plural by itself? Can it be? Whatever the case, the author of the book, Holy Conversation, amongst many other books, he's the senior professor of evangelism and spiritual formation at Fuller Seminary. Senior means he is retired. He's a UCC pastor, and he is a kindred spirit that I have just met for thinking about how to have these sort of conversations and invite people to follow Jesus in community with the church. We would love to connect with you more fully, and you can do that at sycamorecreekchurch.org/connect. Dr. Peace, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us over this past hour. We're deeply appreciative of it.
I've enjoyed the conversation greatly.
Friends, I want to go out with just a little taste of the series that we're in this past Sunday. We started off this first of 4 weeks, and we're going to leave you with a trailer for episode 1, Have Better Christian Conversations. Be curious, be creative, and peace out.
Ready.
We as Christians need to relearn how to talk about our faith. We need to relearn how to have deep and meaningful conversations. We're starting a new series today called Holy Conversations, based on a book called Holy Conversation by Richard Peace. And we're going to spend 4 weeks on talking about sharing our faith, about, well, really learning how to become good Christian conversationalists, to have better Christian conversations, to be good Christian conversation partners.